So, hello everyone. So, as promised, I am here with world-renowned medium Paul Jacobs, and I am inspired to invite him here after seeing him give an address at the Journey Within Church in the United States. And I'm just very impressed by his stage presence, by his knowledge, and his connection to the spirit world. And so I would like to say welcome, Paul. And if you could please introduce yourself.
Okay, as you know already, I'm Paul Jacobs. I'm a spiritualist, a member of the Spiritualist National Union, which is one of the world's largest spiritualist organisations, and also Spiritualist National Union is also a religion, a science and philosophy. I'm a speaker, awarded a certificate for speaking in the Spiritualist National Union, which I've now been doing for over 30 years.
Wow, that's very impressive. Thank you so much. You have many years of wisdom and experience, and we're hoping to learn more from that. I'm sure we will. So the first question I have for you, Paul, is how do you prepare in advance for a spiritualist address?
Preparation, there's many ways many people could prepare for address. For myself, I do not sit down in a formal sense, because I do not do a prepared written address. I never know what I'm going to say word to word. I will have the theme or the idea of what I might want to speak about, but that will actually change throughout the day before I have to give that address in the evening. So really, when I first wake up in the day, I send out my thoughts to the spirit world, and those who work with me, that we're working that evening, and I'm sending out my thoughts to the spirit world, but also listening and going within my own soul, not in a formal sense of sitting down in meditation, but just as I'm going along my everyday business during that day, and to see what thoughts or ideas come into mind, into my consciousness, and those will vary, and I will not know till the last moment, till I actually take that address. And actually, even maybe just before I go onto a platform, I may have an idea, and then as I stand up to speak, that idea changes.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you cannot sit down and prepare a formal address, but then in a way it can sometimes be lacking inspiration. And also then it depends on the church, what they're looking for. They sometimes like to do a reading, sometimes I will use that, sometimes I will not. It depends what the reading is.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. And speaking of readings, I know a lot of times speakers will mention a quote or refer to other historical mediums in their address. How do you have special quotes you like, or do you bring a quote with you?
I never take a quote with me as I'm doing the address. As the theme goes along, there may be a quote that I know and heard, maybe from speakers in the past I've heard, or from like Gordon Higginson as an example. It may be from some of our old pioneers, so like Andrew Jackson Davis. One particular service I wanted to speak really about free will and destiny. So I used that as my theme because it was a subject I'd been discussing, and I was disagreeing with my colleagues on the subject. And the evening before I had to do a church service, I opened Andrew Jackson Davis's book, and it opened at the page Free Will and Destiny. And it was just one small paragraph that just summed it all up for me. So I used that quote. Or if in a church reading, I may take one word or one quote or one sentence from the church's reading to bring into my address if I can't use the whole reading as the theme.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great point too, as well. And it's beautiful to realize that many of us go through that same process. And so, as students are learning, it's good to have, I think, different ideas about ways to approach a spiritualist address. And what does it feel like to be giving an address? So, while you're up on the podium and you're connecting with spirit and you're looking out at the crowd, what does that feel like?
Actually, today I actually can find giving a truly inspirational address can be more fulfilling and satisfying than actually a demonstration of mediumship. And I've also learned that actually through an address that's truly inspired, you can actually touch more people than you can through a demonstration
Yeah.
of mediumship. And that came clear to me. I was working abroad where we don't have formal spiritualist services. I was in Italy at the time, and I thought, how are we going to get the knowledge across? So I began, and this is 30 years ago.
Mm.
And so at the end of a demonstration, I always gave a question and answer session,
Okay.
and then there may be just one question
Mhm.
that you could get your teeth into and would
Yeah.
inspire you. And the first time I did it, I could feel and see the change in the audience
Mhm.
and realize that I was actually touching more people than I did in the demonstration. So we should never underestimate the address and the power and the effect that it can have. And for those of you in the early part of your journey of wanting to speak inspirationally and your philosophy or take part in church services, don't underestimate yourselves and the potential and the possibilities. I never thought I could be a speaker. Actually, when I first began, I wouldn't take services where I had to do an address. I would only demonstrate. And even in my development, I wouldn't even, when it was my turn to do the prayer in a church circle, I wouldn't even do the prayer. I used to refuse to. And you see, I never thought I would be able to speak. One, I never had any training in speaking throughout my history. I've never had any. Two, I was somebody who had a strong local accent, so I didn't think I spoke well enough. And I said to Gordon Higginson, should I go for elocution lessons? And he says,
Mhm.
no, don't you dare.
Mm.
People love you for that.
Yeah.
That's part of you, he said, Also here, I had very little education in my schooling, also dyslexic. My vocabulary of words is not that large. So I thought all those ingredients, where I thought were negative, it would be impossible for me to be a speaker. So I stayed just with demonstration. And
Yes.
I can remember when I did first start speaking, only because I was put into a situation I couldn't get out of doing it. And afterwards, people came up to me and says, "Oh, Paul, we've really enjoyed the address." And I found that hard to believe. So I says, "Why wasn't the demonstration any good?" I just thought they was trying to find something nice to say because the demonstration hadn't gone very well. And I said to them, "Why did you enjoy it?" They
Right.
said, one, you felt what you were saying, you were speaking to us as an individual.
Mhm.
And two, and this is important, they said, you spoke with so much passion and conviction.
Mm.
So I never really speak and use words or try to put anything across that I don't believe and have a conviction within my own soul, and not just basically what other people have written in books.
Mhm.
Actually, in my speaking, I might actually be in confliction with what some people have written in books.
Yeah.
But it's that passion, and it's the power of your own spirit that emanates. And in a way, there has to be that charisma. That there has to be that, in a way, just like anybody who's a performer in any form of way. You have to create that presence. You have to own that platform, that stage. And there's got to be that power of your spirit behind those words that you're expressing. It's not just the words themselves. It's the feel and the power and conviction behind them.
That's wonderful. And I think that's an important part of what separates maybe a spiritualist address speaker from an ordinary speaker, although many are inspired. I think that as an audience member, many of us enjoy feeling that power coming from the speaker and through the speaker. And so I would say, is there a particular speaker that you've seen in your past that really stands out where the message stuck with you?
3 people come to mind, of course, Gordon Higginson, and then you've got to realise with this speaking, this is what we've also got to understand with inspiration. There's many forms of inspiration. Yeah. So, for example, with Gordon Higginson, there would be just like if you could say, it was just in a way the man Gordon speaking. There would be then Gordon that would be inspired from his own soul, because I believe there's a knowledge within our own soul our mind, conscious mind, isn't always aware of. So that's wonderful and just as important. Yeah. Then there's the inspiration from the spirit world, and then there's a further inspiration. I'm not speaking about trance as trance. I'm speaking where there's like an overshadowing. And if you listen to Gordon regular, you could see which aspect that he was working from. Yeah. Another one was Ronald Baker. He was a secretary of the Spiritualist National Union many years ago. He's now passed to the spirit world, and he was a wonderful medium and teacher. But he was, I would say, he was one of our finest speaking. Now, I listened to him 35 years ago, only once, and I still remember it to this day.
Wow, that's incredible.
And I can't remember the whole thing. I can remember the title. It was called The Ship of Spiritualism.
Wow.
And I can remember those opening statements he made, and they've stayed to me to this day. And I actually sometimes quote those words from him, you know. So then another one was Jean Bassett. She was a minister of the SNU. She was actually in charge of the education. She was chairman of the education committee of the SNU, and she was also really well known for teaching speaking. And her last address before she passed to the spirit world was absolutely amazing. And what it was, I mean, you could actually see it was, because actually she was very close to going to the spirit world. And actually you'd have thought she was part in the spirit world. So I feel actually the spirit world, there was an overshadowing from the spirit world, and she was such a powerful, formidable woman. And it was like, again, the power behind it. And the address was a really, truly pure spiritualist address, which was in a way was like a rallying call coming from the spirit world, in a way a little bit like a war rally. Honestly, it just amazed everybody. I don't know where you'll find it, but it is available somewhere. I'd ask any speaker to have a listen to it. It's absolutely wonderful, and there's many of Gordon Higginson's you can listen to too.
Right. Could you repeat her name again?
Jean Bassett. Yeah, she actually wrote the book 100 Years of Spiritualism, and she wrote Gordon Higginson's book on the Side of Angels.
Oh, beautiful. Yes, I'm reading the first one currently. I'm in the middle of it. It's a great book. Yeah. And so there are many great things about a spiritualist address. Is there anything that you would suggest to people not to do during an address?
Well, one of the most boring things I find when I go to sleep is when the speaker in a spiritualist church begins, "Today I'm going to speak on the second principle, the brotherhood of man." And I think, oh God, not again. Okay. You can speak on the brotherhood of man it can be the conclusion to what you're speaking about. When I do speaking with students, I always say to them, when you finish speaking, I want to know, and I'm going to ask the rest of the students if they know which principle you're speaking about without you mentioning the principle.
Oh, that's brilliant. That is brilliant.
Yeah, not that it's wrong to mention the principle, but I would bring it in the middle or in the conclusion. Okay, and the Spiritualist National Union teaches this, and the teaching, address in the formation, there should be the beginning, the middle, and the end. Yeah, and I find with a lot of students when I'm teaching students, they're fine with the middle, but weak on the beginning and the conclusion, the beginning and the ending, because the beginning is getting their attention to listen, because to hold an audience for a 20-minute address, it's not easy.
No.
So you've got to grab their attention and their minds by those opening statements. I find a good way of doing that is by beginning asking them a question, the audience a question.
Okay, that's excellent.
This is just one thing. Okay, it's not a question. I've used it the odd occasion. What is a spiritualist? What is spiritualism about? What's the real purpose behind our movement and you being a spiritualist? So then you get them thinking for themselves, because I don't believe we're there to preach at people, to tell people what they should be or how they should be.
Right.
What we've got to do is that address touch their souls and inspire them to come to their own answers and conclusions. Yeah, right. That's what it's really about, and also bringing it to that conclusion. Yeah, that gives that final impact. And in case you've lost them a little bit, reminding them about really what the address was about with your opening statements.
Yes, exactly. That's so.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yes, it completely makes sense, and you're really speaking to my soul right now. I'll tell you. So many modern day spiritualists, I think, are kind of looking to historical teachers, but also modern teachers like yourself, who are able to take their knowledge and apply it to today's society and conditions we live in.
That's right. That's right. And when we talk about inspiration, so we can get inspiration from many things in life, or that will trigger your inspiration in your own soul, something that resonates with you. It can be a piece of music, it can be some the words from a song. I've actually quite had a lot of inspiration from actual fiction novels.
Okay.
Yeah, I can remember one I used from James Brown, James Brown, that's a musician, sorry, Dan Brown, sorry, Dan Brown, from the novel The Lost Symbol.
Okay.
And I use from his book, something from his book. Yeah. So
it's kind of as an example to explain the principle.
Yeah, so like from that, I'll just quickly explain it. It was I was really enjoying the book, okay, and but then at the end, I was so disappointed at first with the answer, the conclusion of the novel, and then it really clicked and I use this. I've used it in my address because it was supposed to be looking for this. It was searching for this object that was going to give an answer that was going to change, a revelation that was going to change the world. And there wasn't one.
Oh no, that is disappointing.
And this is what I say, and then I use that from his book, and then I say, ladies and gentlemen, there's never going to be another great revelation that's going to change the world.
Right.
because we've already had it, but we've not listened.
Perfect.
Then I will quote Buddha
Yeah.
saying, the temple of heaven is within. Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven. Sorry, I've lost it now, so I've lost my inspiration. Sorry, okay. And Jesus said, my Father and I are one.
Mm.
I said, ladies and gentlemen, if you can find the reality of those two things, there's no other great revelation we need. We've had it, but we've not listened.
That's the truth. I think
Yeah.
it comes full circle in so many things. Mediumship.
I've even used quotes out of Terry Pratchett's books.
There you go.
Yeah, I used another one to do with, I don't know who the author was. It was about Jesus having to come back to the earth for the second time. It was a comedy novel.
Okay. And there you go. And
So
so anything that people can relate to.
that's right, you know, and it's little things like that at the time. And I think, yeah, that's fantastic.
Mhm.
I can use that. But then I don't sit down and prepare it all out.
Mhm.
I just play with it in my mind,
Right.
not in a formal meditative state.
Mhm.
Something might be a good idea for those who are newer on the journey. And when I first did my first address, it wasn't planned. I'd agreed to do a local church at the last moment to cover a cancellation. And I said yes. And then after I put the phone down, I thought, oh, it's a Sunday, they're going to want an address. How am I going to do that? So I did formally sit down
Mhm.
and I sent my thoughts to the spirit world. And the spirit world did this on numerous occasions in my early days. They gave me a clairvoyant image of an object or a scene to give me the theme.
Perfect.
Yeah, and the first time, and this is the cleverness of the spirit world. And I thought, have the spirit world really given me that? And they gave me the picture of the praying hands.
Mhm.
I thought, okay, they want me to speak about prayer. And, you know, and this gave me the trust and the conviction, show me how clever the spirit world is. So the reading the church had chosen
Mhm.
was from a book of verse with the picture of the praying hands on the cover. The reading was all about prayer, and the last contact in the demonstration after the address,
Mhm.
which was the most important contact and message, was all about a prayer the recipient had been sending out to the spirit world.
Oh,
So prayer ran all the way through the total service. See, and I think we've got to remember that intelligence of the spirit world. Yeah, they
absolutely.
did that on numerous occasions, and then another time, I just, you know, thinking, you know, what am I going to speak about? And I was sitting there, and there's a pen and paper nearby, and I just picked it up, and I just wrote the word life. I thought, what have I written that for? So I looked at it, and I decided to look at each letter, and I took the word L for love,
Oh.
I for intuition, the inner voice,
Mhm.
F for faith, and E for eternity.
Oh, that's
So I
beautiful.
built my whole address on that. I
Wow.
didn't build it before I went. I didn't know what I was going to say.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's that sort of thing. If people need a more prepared address, we've got to make sure, again, because that can be a little bit staid, a little bit boring in some cases, but it doesn't mean it's wrong, and you cannot give a good address by that. All right. But what I did with some of my students, I got them to be inspired, you know, sit and be inspired with a theme or a subject or an aspect,
Mhm.
and then maybe just sit down then with a pen and paper and then just write it, try and write it inspirational, not in a formal sense of writing exactly what you're going to write. Yeah.
Sure.
And then play with it and adapt it and change it. That may be a way to do a formal. You cannot read it word to word.
Right.
You can have bullet points if you you wish. Yeah. Okay. So that is good. You know, I sometimes think in spiritualist churches, yes, we can use, and I will use things from other religions, but sometimes for me, a lot of the addresses are not spiritualist enough. Yeah. And also, you have to forgive me, and I hope I'm not offending anyone. There's also what I call two love and light rainbows and fluffy rabbits.
Right.
You know, again, I get bored, you know, I used to hear this often in my early years, you know, oh, I got up this morning and the sun was shining, so I decided to go in the walk in the garden and all the beautiful flowers and the fragrance, and this was wonderful, you know,
I hear you.
but like the whole address is like that, you know, it's too sweet and sugary for me. But maybe that's my personality, you know. So.
Right. Well, I think that's wonderful. And it's interesting how you're talking about the intelligence of the spirit world, because just this week I was telling a friend, oh, you know, you need to search for the answer inside yourself. And so it's interesting to hear you making that same, sharing that same intelligence as well here. So I would say that I just have so many questions, but I'm kind of trying to narrow it down to two more for the sake of time. And I would say that I'm curious to know if you have some sort of maybe a mental outline. I know it's inspired, and I know, or like a checklist. Are there things that you try to include and address that people expect? Um,
Yeah, you know, well, it's not what they, well, I don't think the audience expects anything in the general public wise. If you're going to want to qualify within a religious organisation such as the Spiritualist National Union, or really, I suppose, any religion, you know, it is, you know, it has to be based on our seven principles. That's the
mhm,
foundation. Yeah. Okay. So you must be touching and covering them. It doesn't mean you've got, like I said, you've got to read off the principle, and I'm going to speak about this principle. But what you're speaking about has got to come under the umbrella of one or more of those principles. Yeah. I do like to mention, not every time, occasionally people from the past within spiritualism who've worked hard to create what we have today in spiritualism, or who have inspired me in spiritualism, you know, and then use the reasons why they've inspired me, you know. What I can give one experience. You see, I think we look sometimes too much in a formal educational way at speaking, you know. I can remember getting the church ready with Gordon Higginson for the Harvest Festival. And I've used this story in address because putting a little personal story in is also good. It makes it interesting,
mhm,
as long as it's not just all about yourself, but as long as it's to give an example of something, yeah, which can only be a small part. And I've used this in my addresses, and we was both on the platform putting all the fruit and veg out for the Harvest Festival, and it was a very large platform. I was one end, Gordon was the other, and I got this last bag of oranges, and every time I put the last orange, they all fell off. And under my breath, I was cursing this orange, yeah, and these oranges.
yeah,
Now, I wasn't verbalising them, and all of a sudden I heard Gordon say, "Paul," and I turned around, and he looked at me, and as he looked at me, he started to walk over. He says, "Paul, don't swear at those oranges." He says, um, "They are seeds of God.
oh,
Speak to them with love." And he then picked up that orange, placed the last orange, and they all stayed perfectly. Okay. So I was trying to use that as an example in his relationship and how we should have a relationship
mhm,
and conviction in the wonder of this divine power we know as God. So that was a nice little story people would enjoy. We
mm,
gave an example of somebody's reality.
mhm,
Yeah. So like with Gordon, I used, you know, it wasn't just his mediumship. It was the power and relationship that he'd manifested within him and emanated from him. So I use that as a little story. So there's lots of things we can do. I think we've got to get away. You've got to go through lots of educational books to formulate your address. Yes, you've got to have a source of knowledge. You know, to be honest with you, I've hardly read a book in my life to do with spiritualism.
Right.
But doesn't mean I don't know my history. I
Right.
don't know the pioneers of the past and some of the things they did and said. But you see, I'm not a very educational person. I never have been. I only ever went to school, you know. But that doesn't mean. And if you look in the actually a lot of the old pioneers, some of the best speakers we had were uneducated people.
Yes. Right.
They were just ordinary men and women, had no educational background at all.
Look in your heart, right?
Yeah. So you know, I've emphasised this in a couple of different ways as we've been speaking, because there's a lot of people out there who think they could never speak, just like for the reasons I gave you at the beginning of this interview. Don't let that put you off.
Right.
There's an inspiration in all of us. Yeah. You know, another thing I tried to do, I did with a group of students, I said, I want you to use an experience from your own life, positive or negative, that you learned from, that's helped you in life.
Yes.
And your philosophy and approach to life, to touch and inspire others. But most of them just lost themselves in talking about their experience, not how it inspired them, the difference that experience made them, what changed in them through that experience. Yeah. So, you know, we can use those personal experiences, but we can't spend all the time speaking about the experience itself.
Yes. Okay. That makes sense. And I do have one follow-up question to what you said there for clarification on how can people educate themselves about the pioneers without maybe reading old dusty textbooks? But do you learn this by going to talks or watching YouTube videos or?
Mine was just really through basically listening to other speakers or some of the great speakers. It's like for me, I will use, you know, from some of the great speakers from the past, like Gordon Higginson, you know. Please don't get me wrong, it's not wrong to read books or do any education. I actually think doing your I don't know what the paper's called for your, you know, for your qualifications in the union. So that will give you a thing to speak about the pioneers, you know. But I'll be honest with you, I don't use dates and this sort of thing very little, you know. You know, I don't really think, you know, there's a difference between a lecture and an address. So I don't really think people coming into a church for a service are wanting a history lesson.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. You know, what we've got to be touching people's souls, inspiring them to go forward and giving them upliftment, hope, trying to give them a relief from a moment from their pain or their suffering, you know, not an history lesson. Okay. So yeah, if I'm speaking and I mention the Fox sisters, you know, yes, I might use that and use the date. You know, I might speak the date of modern day spiritualism began, but I'm not into all that in a spiritual address. Maybe if you're doing qualifications, they like to hear a little bit more of that than I particularly use, you know. But that's okay. And again, if you are somebody who's more the studious type and have got to do it in that formal sense, yes, there can be some very good interest in addresses, okay. But if you're going to do that, though, you've got to bring in your personality and individuality, yeah. Because you as a person, like Gordon said, me as a person, my accent, how I am, you know, I know I got told off in a formal sense about I'm too expressive with my physical body.
Yes.
Yeah, but they couldn't find any other fault with my address.
There you go. Perfect.
But that's me, you know.
Yeah.
And
It,
actually, I arranged a media training at the Arthur Findlay College, and you know, because I was told off about too much hand expression, the media training people from a top television company, and they asked. Nobody, they asked for a volunteer, and none of the other tutors at the college would volunteer. So they all said, "Oh, you do it, Paul."
yeah.
So I did it, and but I made sure I kept my arms at my side.
Right.
And when I finished it, these TV people, they said, "What you did was perfect, except one thing: there was no physical expression." I said, "Well, I normally do, but I was told that I did it too much, so I tried not to do it at all." Yeah, but you know, you've got to get the people to warm to you, you know, you know, and when you take to speaking, you've got, you know, change your voice,
Mhm.
you know, depending on what words you're using or trying to get across, or what point you're trying to get across. When you've got to soft it, mellow it, be stronger, firmer, um, um, you know, the words being expressed in a sound. If it's speaking about something emotional, you know, it's got to be like an orchestra of all the instruments of those things. Yeah.
It's beautiful, really. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and allowing all of us to get a little insight into you and your methods, because there are different styles and you have a really beautiful one, and I know a lot of people are drawn to it, and it's great for those of us who relate to the way you teach and speak, and to maybe learn a little bit more. So people who are interested in learning more about what you have to offer as in the way of a teacher, which is a lot, what's the best way for them to reach you?
It's really probably becoming a friend on Facebook, or following my page. I'm not very good at self-promotion, really. My website, I don't think I've got any event on my website available for you to find or look at. I'm not so good at those things. So that's normally the best way, through the two Facebook
Perfect.
channels, or Instagram, or something like that. There's something else I was going to say to you, and it's gone. Oh yes, I said I don't really read books. I have one book, which is Andrew Jackson Davis, the father of modern day spiritualism, and the harmonial philosopher. I've got the actual original.
Oh, wow.
Okay,
Yeah,
it's in Old English, so it's not a book you can read page to page.
it's hard to.
But what I will do, I'll keep it next to my bed. It's like a Bible,
Yeah.
and I will just open it up at random,
Mm-hmm.
and just see what, if there's a paragraph that touches me.
Mm.
I said there was one, I opened it up random, and the first words I read, and it spoke about the shackles of the physical.
Mm.
I thought,
Beautiful.
I like that. So I did my own, I used that as my main thing in my address.
Oh, that's outstanding. That's beautiful. And
But see, a lot of people, when they take things from books, it's as if like they take like a whole page, I just take a sentence or a paragraph, and
mhm,
then make it personally to Paul, how it's being expressed, not how it's being written in the book.
sure.
So please, I'm not putting anybody off from using books, okay?
Oh, no,
But
no.
try and look at it that way. Take something and see how that inspires you in the way you can express it and put it across in your personality and individual way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, some people, I think, sleep with the books on their nightstand or near their bed just to absorb the wonderful energy from it. And but it can be tedious. I think that, but it's nice to have, modern translation for that. And I think you're really excellent at that.
That's one. Thank you.
So thank you again. And in closing, I was just curious, do you have a particular way where you sentence or something that you close with when you're giving an address? Like something that's particular to you? Or do you just kind of end each one differently and then go into silence? Or do you thank the audience? I'm just curious.
No, I just say my last word and don't say anything at the silence, and then go and sit down.
Thank you so much.
And that's why your conclusion is important.
Mhm.
Those last words and bringing the conclusion of what you've spoken about is important. There's no need to say anything or finish it off with anything else.
Thank you.
Okay,
And
good.
I guess I would also just say that I thoroughly enjoyed reading your book. Could you remind me of the title?
Paul, Man of Spirit.
Paul, Man of Spirit. Yeah.
Okay. You can only get the at the moment. You can only get it on the download version from Kindle or Amazon. Right?
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'm sure some people will be interested in that. Thank you so much, Paul, and
My pleasure.
enjoy your church address. I know you're off to serve Spirit, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pleasure speaking to you and everybody listening.
And I am here with Simone Key, who has graciously agreed to share her knowledge about giving a spiritualist address. And I have seen her speak a number of times and have felt such a strong connection to her connection to spirit, I would say. She's so good at bringing it through with power and passion. And so I have invited her here today to share some of her insight with us. So I'd ask Simone if you would please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Simone Key, and I am a minister of the Spiritualist National Union and an appointed teacher of the Spiritualist National Union. And I'm so pleased to be here, and especially for this subject, because it's a subject that's very close to my heart. When I started working on a church platform way back in the 80s, I had no idea what the demands of that position were. I had no idea of the responsibilities we have to our audience, our congregation, to the spirit world, and to ourselves. And in those early days, I was terrified to speak publicly. I'd never ever worked in the public eye before. My job had always been PA, so I was always behind someone else. So working in the spotlight, if you see what I mean, was something that was very, very difficult for me. And it was something that it took me many years to overcome. However, now it's a subject I thoroughly enjoy, because for me it's a little bit of a journey. I know that we're going to talk about later about how we structure and so on, but for me, you know, you never know exactly what we're going to produce, but we have a theme, we have a structure and so on. But for me, this is a subject that I really love, because we all know that those messages from the spirit world, those contacts we have from our loved ones, are so, so important. Of course they are. But if you're in a room full of 100 people, if we're lucky, we may only reach 6 or 7 people. But with the address, that can touch everyone. And that power that we connect with and we work with in that address can touch the soul of every individual that's in that room. So that's what I've learned, very briefly, over the years, how to use the power and how to speak about the spirit, because it has to be about, the address has to be about teaching. It's about sharing our philosophy, helping our people understand who we are and what we believe, but why we believe it as well. It's not faith, you know, it's a tried and tested religion. It's not a faith. as such. You know, it's one that we can come to in our own understanding, because that's where our own spirit leads us.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's something that I think resonates with a lot of people, of the nervousness and then finding a beautiful journey from the course. You mentioned powers. Where does that come from, would you say?
Well, I think it's a combination of mine and the spirit worlds as well. And that, I believe, takes time to develop. Don't feel it's something that we can create together overnight. And I believe, as I've mentioned on other areas many times, that all mediumship is a process of progressive refinement. So the more you do it, the more refined it becomes, and the more powerful it should come as well. Don't get me wrong, we can all have a bad day. I don't mean it that way. But just the fact that, you know, with that connection we have with the spirit world that's been tried and tested, that connection we have, where they can touch the very essence of our soul, that's what provides the power. And also recognizing that we work with a team, a spirit team, I call it, and therefore we are an integral part of that team. We're no more important and we're no less important than any of the minds that work with us. However, I feel that this is a team effort. So therefore, you know, I work with that power to hopefully bring through the best I can do. I'm not saying it's good enough for everybody, but it's the best I can do in that moment. And it depends very much on the need of the people in the audience as well, as to what we're going to say and how we say it. You see, I believe that is all about healing. I believe every part of my religion is about healing, not necessarily just in energy, but words can be very, very comforting and help people to understand themselves. And that's where I come from.
That's beautiful, beautiful. So as you learned how to become a speaker and learn how to work with your team, how has that process evolved since you originally started training? Could you take us through that?
Well, it's difficult. I'm trying to remember because it's such a long time ago. I think I always, you know, I've always been a very, what I call, structured person. And I know that when I first came into the movement, I used to watch people and they would stand and they would say, let's see what we're going to talk about tonight. And they'd have a word and they'd start talking about the word. Well, I now realize that, and I would do the same, please don't misunderstand me. I started by doing that. But now I feel that not only the spirit world, but my audience deserves more than that from me. I do believe in structure, but not in reading it. I don't believe in having a production as such that I can rehearse, but I have a start, I have a middle, and I have a conclusion as well. I have a theme that runs through it.
Right.
And for me, that's how I meet the spirit, is through my own, if you like, empathy with people. That's where they join me. The spirit world joins me in that. And now and I know a lot of people don't get it, that when you're planning your address, and mine is not on paper, mine is in my mind, you know, how am I going to start? Where is it going to lead to? What's my theme? And what is it I want to achieve in that time? What points do I want to get across to my audience? And I will have, as I say, a very light plan. But what people don't get is that the spirit world is involved in our planning, not just the end product.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to realize that, because I felt that in the beginning, by having some form of plan, that I was actually denying them their input. But in fact, what I'm doing is I'm encouraging them to help me go in a particular way, the way that they have desired, not the way I have. But I feel that the address really should be about the individual speaking from their heart and not what sounds clever.
Mhm.
It should be sincere and it should be simple. No, I am not talking about dumbing down one's vocabulary. That's the last thing I would ever ask anybody to do. But I really do believe that, you know, that this is something, that the area that touches us is what will touch other people.
Mhm.
If I sat here and I said, off the top of my head, I said, right, you know, well, I went for a walk today and I looked at the trees and I looked at the sky and I looked at the ground and I looked at the birds. I reckon most people after about 3 minutes of that will get really, really bored. I would expect them to get bored. I haven't said anything.
Yeah. Mhm.
But if I said, have you ever thought about what happens when you're looking at the sky through the trees?
Mhm.
How you change because of your connection to the spirit within the sky and within the trees. You see what I'm saying? So
Yes.
it's about, our work isn't just about getting our philosophy across, but it's about delivering it in a way that touches someone, that makes them open their eyes, if you like, awakens them to something else. Maybe not what you're saying, but something else you are saying that can, as a result of it, if you see what I mean. So that's what this is about. And people don't realize that our address should be about philosophy. It is about our philosophy. But if I started with the words, you know, ladies and gentlemen, tonight I'm going to talk to you about our sixth principle, you know, compensation, retribution, blah, blah, blah. Will everyone go yawn, you know? But if you started with something like, do you know, have you ever thought you can't die?
Right.
That you're going to live forever.
Yes.
And that there is no end to eternity. And it's about how we start, how we grab people's attention, how we maintain their attention throughout the address, how you monitor your audience. There are so many public speaking techniques we need to learn as well.
Yes.
You know, and it isn't just about getting your voice to the back of the room, because sometimes the pregnant pause can say more than your philosophy.
Yeah.
You know, that silence that you take a breath and maybe just for a couple of seconds you don't say anything, that can have more effect than if you ramble.
Absolutely.
So, and also I feel that sometimes our gestures, rather than sort of looking, and I know that's one thing I had to really, really struggle to overcome, was my nerves. Because, you know, when you shake from head to toe, it is very, very difficult trying to maintain some sort of professionalism, you know. And I remember so well the very first time I ever worked on a platform. It was the usual story, you know, the medium hadn't turned up and I had, you know, and I was asked, would you take tonight's service? I wasn't scared. I was petrified. And I remember trying to get a glass of water, and I remember holding it to my mouth and it was banging on my teeth because my hands were shaking so much. And then I remember giving this lady in the audience a message. I haven't got a clue what I was telling her, but I remember over the top of it that my voice was saying, you're going to die, you're going to die. And I had stopped breathing with fear. And I remember that like it was yesterday. And I know it sounds a bit sort of strange, but in a funny kind of way, I'm glad I had that experience, because I know what it's like to be scared. I know what it's like to be terrified. I know the difference. I know what it's like to feel completely overwhelmed with the responsibility of it. And so I know that nobody should ever be put in that position with absolutely no experience. You know, one of the best things to do is, if our listeners can, is to have an opportunity in a church, for instance, or a spiritualist group, where we start off by just reading a piece. And by standing up in front of people just reading something, that prepares us as well. You know, it doesn't have to be the whole service. You know, I did a service recently for somewhere in the States and online, and it was lovely for me because there were about 6 or 7 people all took part in it. One person did the opening prayer, another did the closing prayer. You know, I did the address, somebody else did a reading, and it was lovely. Somebody else did a healing prayer. It was great because it was almost like a mini congregation within the actual structure of it, you know, which I really loved because it is about people. All of what we're doing is about people. It's not just about words, you know, but it's helping people through those words to recognize things that happen to us every day. You know, we've all been in that position where we've lost our confidence. We've all been in that position, you know, where we feel life is so tough. And, you know, what can I do? Or, you know, what about whatever can I bring to this? But we've all been there. But when the Spirit comes close to us in those moments, when we share their philosophy, their views with a combination of our own, and that's when we can broaden the minds of people who want to listen. Only those that want to listen. You can't get through to those that don't.
Right.
And those words should resonate with them in some way to really hopefully boost their morale a bit, if you like, or give them some upliftment, some encouragement, some support to say, you know, okay, you can go away from here. Think about that and think about your place in all of this. Because that is, for me, what it's all about. It's about us. It's about life. And what we talk about should be about life. I don't mean personal details. I really don't mean that. I don't feel that that's a time or a place. It's okay to say, I remember a time when. But one of the things that, you know, when, again, because I've been around such a long time, one of the things that used to, you know, irritate me and still does to a degree, but I thankfully don't hear it so much, is when people think that their journey into spiritualism is a suitable address. And it may be very fascinating for them, but most of us have heard the same story over and over again, because we've all come in our own way, if you see what I mean, you know, but it's just how we found it. But, you know, it's not enough. It has to be more than how I came into spiritualism, you know. And for me, it's important that we have that period with the spirit world that enables us to make that connection so that we're in harmony in ourselves, if you see what I mean. So it's no good starting off feeling absolutely terrified. You know, and having, as I said before, having been there, I understand what that's like. I mean, I do try to teach people how to manage their nerves. I do try to teach people how to hide their nerves, because most people can deal with them, but they can't hide them, you know. And also how to get stronger in their work as well. And a lot of it is mind over matter, you know. For instance, if I was to say to somebody who seems to be, if you pardon the expression, but sort of crumbling, you know, they're really in a bad way, you know, if I whisper in their ear before they start, you know, just remember, you're the best medium in the world, the very, very best medium in the world. And that gives them a little bit of energy, that little bit of confidence that helps them express how they feel and what they want to say. You know?
That's a good tip for people to have that positive attitude when they're working. And I'm curious to know, as an audience member yourself, I'm sure you've been to many services, is there a particular medium who you've seen speak, or something, a message that's really stuck with you over the past?
I love good speakers. When we come into this movement, when we come into spiritualism, most, I'm not saying everybody, because we're not robots, we are all individuals, but most people, we come in because of the mediumship, or we're attracted to the mediumship. But that normally only lasts a few months. After that, it's the public speaking.
Yes.
People that I remember are and the people that I am in awe of were the wonderful speakers. And it was speakers like Glyn Edwards. He was an amazing speaker. He had the most amazing vocabulary. The very first time I saw him work, he opened my mind to so much more. As a student, I'm talking about. And I became a fan of his. I started following all over the country and so on. And I was very, very privileged because I worked with him for the last a few years, you know, of his life. And in fact, I worked with him right up until a few weeks prior to his passing. But he was such a wonderful speaker. Again, he had such a knowledge of religion, other religions, and he had a knowledge of spiritualism. And he had a knowledge of the spirit world that really, really opened my mind to so much more. And then there were people like Ivy Northage, who is the president of the College of Psychic Studies, and she was a wonderful, wonderful speaker as well. Robin Stevens was an amazing medium who was a wonderful speaker too. But the one person that I think many of us will remember forever is a lady who's in the spirit world now, who is a friend of a lot of us, you know, like Janet, as you said, Paul and so on, is Minister Jean Bassett. And Jean was an amazing woman. She used to make you laugh all the time. I'm not sure she meant to, but anyway, that was another story. But she was incredible. But she was very, towards the end of her life, she became very, very ill. And I remember it was one open week at the Arthur Finney College. And on the Sunday, we always have a very special service. And she was doing the address. And I was, myself and Mavis Patilla, we were to do the mediumship afterwards. And Jean took this address. And it was mind-blowing. Everybody in the room, you could see them all trying not to blink because it was so fired up and so emotional. And what she was saying was, she was just facing individuals and saying, you can't die. And then she'd go to the next one and say, do you know you can't die? And so on. And it was really, really powerful what she was talking about, and about how we were as spirit in the body and so on, you know. And it was amazing. And I remember, because again, I had to do the mediumship after her, and I was thinking, please God, stop me from blinking. I do not want to look like I'm crying, you know, because I won't be very professional. So, but that's something that we all talk about even today. That address was incredible, you know. So yes, there's been lots and lots of speakers and over the years. But I you know, generally I love that side, because that talks to me about the intellect of spiritualism. It talks to me about how we can market the spirit as well, you know, because that's what we're doing when we're talking, you know, about spiritualism and the spirit world. We're marketing, we're their PR, if you like, you know. So it's up to us to get that out, that, you know, information out there in the very best possible way we can.
Yes, it's amazing, and everyone who hears about it really is drawn to it. So I think it's good to help spread the word. And that's interesting, because you're the third person I've interviewed, and all three have mentioned Jean Bassett.
Oh, wonderful! I'm so pleased, and she would be delighted, because Jean was a very special lady to a lot of us, but also because she had a very pronounced lisp. And she had to have elocution lessons, and she was told in the very beginning of her entry into spiritualism that she would never be a speaker. So I am thrilled for her that we've all talked about her.
That's wonderful.
Yeah,
that's so awesome. Thank you. Well, I do, a recent thing that came up is being animated as a medium, and when a student's working, knowing if spirit is with the student, that sometimes is questioned. So does anything come to mind with you, advice you could give, or when you observe someone working, how do you know spirit's with them? And do you think it's possible to be too animated, or is that a sign that spirit's with them?
I don't think animation is really anything to do with it.
Okay.
Energy is everything.
Mhm.
Energy is everything. Animation, because you can get somebody who's completely over the top animated,
Yeah.
and there's very little contact there, you know.
Okay.
There's never no contact, because the spirit would never do that, not the world that works with me anyway. But I feel it's all to do with energy. I believe my work is all about energy. And when I look at the aura, when I look at the energy that emanates from the person, and I'm looking at the spirit connection,
Mhm.
and I'm looking to see how much of that power they're using.
Right.
That's what I do, you know.
Gotcha.
And and I think also it's so difficult because mediumship is so personal, and because it's so individual, everybody's different. And so therefore, when you've got someone who may be over animated, and they may be having too much of their own mind come in, that's very difficult for anybody to help another student with, without being counterproductive. In other words, we're trying to remain positive as well, because nobody wants to hear they're doing something wrong, you know, basically. But it's a way of how we handle that, and how we can say, you know, just a moment, just stop there a moment, go back. And I think that's what happens. A lot of people, I notice when I'm watching students work, if they start off with a piece of information from the spirit contact or the communicator, and then they develop it, which is not theirs to develop. It's the spirit world's job to develop that. But it's almost like, you know, you give them, for instance, if they saw, and I'm not suggesting for a minute one would want to look for this, but if you saw a flower, then it would be what they thought of the flower and not what the spirit world thought of the flower, if that makes sense. Just to use a very simple idea, even though I don't normally work with flowers, so it's odd. But just, it's about how we can help them stay within the information and not go off at tangents. That's the difficulty, because every one of us has got a vivid imagination, and that's the aspect of our minds that the spirit world works with. If we didn't have an imagination, we wouldn't be able to see the spirit world subjectively, you know. So therefore, you don't want to curb someone's imagination, far from it, but you want to help them to control it.
Sure.
You know, and that's can be quite difficult sometimes, but it's worth it, because it's really worthwhile in the end.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have about 5 minutes left, and I do have maybe 3 more questions. So I think what I'd like to do, these are just coming to my mind as you're talking.
Yeah.
So I think I'll just read them to you, and then you can just kind of whatever.
Okay.
So as far as the principles are concerned, are there any that are overused, and are there any that you would recommend that people focus on that you don't hear a lot about? That's the first one. Another one is if a student keeps repeating words, say they say the word "and" 50 times. Do you have any tips for them how to stop that?
Yeah.
And then I have one more question I'll save.
Okay. I'll start with the first one because I'm trying to keep them quick for you. But the first one is a difficult one because because especially in the current political arena, we have difficulties with sexuality. So, you know, talking about fatherhood and brotherhood of man, but we all know that if we change those to suit, they can often lose the essence of what was meant by that. But I do feel that we have to update them. I'm really sorry, but it may not be what everybody else is saying, but I think that they should be more, you know, readable for today's society, to be honest. You know, my 13-year-old granddaughter, she's very well up on it, and I'm sure if I told her those principles, she would, at 13, she would be more than shocked to see, you know. But the only thing I would suggest is that the last principle, eternal progress, open to every human soul. I feel that people think that's about the spirit world, but eternal progress for me is really about today, not just when we get to the spirit world, but it's about today as well. So we can progress every single day of our lives. And I think that I feel that that's something that isn't propounded enough. You know, it's all about somewhere else at some other time, but not right now. You know, that's the only one I would say. And sorry, your second question.
And the second one is if a student keeps repeating the same word.
Okay, the trouble is people count, okay? So when you're giving if they were giving a message and that person said something over and over again, people will come up to you afterwards and say, do you know you said that X number of times? If they're saying that, because this is something else I do teach, if that's being said to you, then they're not listening to you, they're only counting.
Right.
And the very first week I ever spent at the Arthur Finney College was with a group that was called at that time the Swansea Psychic Centre, and I met a wonderful woman who's now in the spirit world. Her name's Del Round, and she taught me how to vary my vocabulary. She taught me by using post-it notes. You know, for instance, you know, there's nothing more boring than somebody giving a message and you know, to somebody in a demonstration, public demonstration, and they're saying, and he's telling me, and he's telling me, and he's telling me. And she taught me to use words like, and now your father is showing you, and now your father is telling you, now your father is trying to make you aware of. And using different expressions, you know, like, you know, we've been joined by a gentleman in the spirit world who tells me he's a dad and he wants to speak to his daughter. I'm aware of a gentleman, and so on, using different vocabulary so that we don't become boring. Sorry about that, but that's the way it is. So when people are saying the same thing over and over again, almost like a record, is also really their safety net, because they feel comfortable with those words, because by saying those words, it's almost like a signal to get their next piece of information.
Yes.
So it's about how to train them so they don't need that word or those words to get that next piece of information.
Right, that's beautiful. I love that, because it's not just taking the word away, it's giving substitution.
No, you've got to help them.
It's great.
You can't just leave it. Just say to them, don't say that. Because the chances are, if you said to me, don't say that, I'd say it. You know?
Exactly. So I think my last question is, well, it's really two questions, but is there a particular way you like to close your address, or have you seen an interesting way that speakers close that stuck with you? And is there anything else you'd like to share before we end?
Okay. I feel that the way I like to leave my address, I can only speak about that, is to make people think.
Okay.
That's what I want. I want them to think. I like to leave it with them. And, you know, I might even say that, and I'd like to leave that with you for you to consider. Or, you know, maybe, you know, the next few days you'd like to think about that and how that works in your life and so on. You know, give them something to focus on if they want it. It doesn't mean everybody does, you know, but that's what I prefer to do. And I do try not to say thank you for listening, because I was taught in the very early days not to say it, but it is hard. It is hard when you know that you've been standing there and they've had to listen to you for 20 minutes, you know. So that's it. So
thank you.
But regarding I know, you know, some people use quotes. Some people have readings. Now that depends in the UK on where you serve, what churches you serve. I can go to my own church, for instance, and there will always be someone there who will do the reading before the address. You know, read a passage or whatever, but you don't have a control over what's being read. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be, depending on what church I go to, it could be a piece out of the Bible, which is completely irrelevant to what I'm talking about. So I just then, when it's said like that, I then just do my own reading. I do my own address, and I just move away from it, and I won't refer to it. If I don't think it's a good address, I won't refer to it. That's how I do it, you know. But you know, sometimes I like certain quotes that I have in my head. I don't carry them around with me, you know, on bits of paper, but I might have a few quotes in my mind that I will share. But I feel that the whole key to a good address is not to try to impress. Be yourself, but be yourself with what you really believe, because your passion, our passion, will touch other people. There's no point talking about something if you're not passionate about it. I don't mean to the point of view that you get emotional. I don't mean that. Sure. But that it does animate us, and that people can see it's genuine. That's the point. And when we speak from the heart and not just from the head, then people will be with us. And you know, and if we can be respectful of people listening as well, and be aware of, you know, the language we use, and also the tone we use, and not to be confrontational or aggressive, you know, but that, you know, that you want to share your knowledge, your information with the public, but it's up to them whether they listen to it or not. And so we have to try to, if we can, to make it as inspiring as possible. But when the spirit's with you as the speaker, when they touch you as the speaker, when you feel, it's almost like a crest of a wave that carries you forward in your thinking. And it's almost like, for that moment, it's almost like you're being held in the moment. That's what matters, because the joy that gives you, the amazing feeling when you come out of it, is something that nothing else can touch. But not only can you feel it, so can everybody else.
Yes, I can feel it. As you shifted there, I could see the colors changing around you in your screen. It's just so beautiful. And you're just such a professional, beautiful medium and speaker. And it's a true honor to have this opportunity to learn from you. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for asking. Thank you so much for asking. It's been a great pleasure, and I hope to see you again soon, sometime. All right.
Yes.
You take care.
You too. I'm Gretchen Meisner with Spiritualism Today, and I am interviewing Janet Nohavec about how to give a spiritualist address. And she is going to share some of her own experiences, tips, and pointers for students around the world. And welcome, Janet.
Thank you. Good morning. Lovely to be with you this morning.
Thank you. And so I would like to ask if you, to start, you could maybe introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your own journey, and then maybe we can get right into the questions.
Sure. Thank you. My name is Reverend Janet Nohavec. I'm pastor of the Journey Within Spiritualist National Union Church in Pompton Lakes, New Jersey. We also have a church in Hydesville, Newark, where spiritualism began. And we also have taken on restoring the Hydesville Schoolhouse Cottage for the history of spiritualism. So quite a few things going on. And I have a full practice as a medium and as a teacher as well.
Thank you. That's quite impressive. And I'd like to ask you, first of all, what is a spiritualist address? In your opinion, what makes it and what sets it aside from other things? What makes it different?
I think if we can harness the power of the spirit, energy, the power that's within our soul to kind of bring that light to an address, it makes it a bit different than what might be an intellectual address. I've heard the term speaking mediumship, which to me is, as we bring alive, to me, that spiritual content, it shifts the address a bit more to a power that's unique. I have to say, unique at times to a spiritualist that's giving an address in a different way than a lot of people who, might type out what they're going to talk about and just purely come from an analytical place. I think a spiritualist who's fully engaged in an address, you almost see that light about them with that external force that's come to enhance their own power.
Yes, that is very inspiring. I agree. And how do you prepare when you're going to give an address, and how has your process changed over time?
My address certainly has changed tremendously over time. Having been a former Roman Catholic nun, most of the people in that religious faith type out their address on a Sunday. They have notes, they prepare before they get up to do it. And as I first opened the church, I was doing that. I have to say, I read from notes and prepared the night before, and there was always inspiration in it. It just meant I was writing it at a different time. As it's evolved, and it does take time. So, I encourage people to be gentle with themselves in their unfoldment. As time goes on, you realize that when you get a little bit more comfortable with public speaking, that you can, step away from those notes and really start to move into the power and engaging with the spirit world, I have to say, with her own soul, and as well, really bringing in the audience.
It's wonderful. And where do you find inspiration for your addresses?
It could be, I may just hear something. I have to say, these days, I could see a Facebook post that stays with me. And, it just, then when I open it up, it's almost like an acorn that just then opens up into a tree, so it can be from anything. It could be something in nature that I saw. It could be an inspirational reading, could be a Facebook post, could be a piece of music. It's a multitude of different things. Whatever seems to move me at that time, I feel like I'm being led to, for whatever reason, bring that, to hold the space for that homily address to unfold.
It's beautiful. And do you typically, when you're going to share a quote, if you do during your address, do you have any favorite particular types of quotes that you go toward, or do you try to stick with spiritualism? Do you go with other religious figures? Or
I certainly don't just stick with spiritualism. I have to say, there's such a multitude of different people that, speak to my heart. So, do I have a favorite place to go to it? I can't say that's true either, I have to say. So it's a really wide range. Sometimes I'll hear something and, just jot it down, and then that just kind of ruminates with me till it's time to speak. So certainly our spiritualist history and tradition, and, some of the people, some of the historical pieces, the principles are always a guideline, that I find important if we're to educate and inspire new spiritualists to be part of the movement. So that's significant, but I pull from everything and anything. You're muted, Gretchen.
Okay, thank you. That's wonderful. Good to know. Thank you. And so I'm really curious how you ended up wanting to give spiritual address, and were there people who inspired you? Were there particular speakers you saw who you admired?
I don't know that the need is what brought me, I have to say, because I opened a spiritualist church. After being a former Catholic nun, I wanted to continue to be of service, and coming to believe, I have to say, in spiritualism. I do have to say Arthur Finley's book, The Rock of Truth, was quite a bit of an eye-opener for me. So when I opened the church, there were very few people locally that knew anything about spiritualism. So the need to have an address within the service was what forced me onto the platform, I have to say.
Yeah.
from there, we've evolved, 25 years to a much different place.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's amazing what you've done. Oh, it's incredible.
Thank you.
And so is there anything in particular about giving an address that you would like to share as far as the do's and don'ts for people? Maybe some of the pitfalls you've learned from yourself?
Sure. I think it has to be engaging. You really, to me, you want to see, people tilting their head, feeling that you feel like your audience is engaged. I think something very dry. And if you're new, just chip away at it, But I also really want to encourage everyone to believe that they have the capacity to evolve as a speaker, There's a wonderful movie, The King's Speech, who's some people have seen. It was is a British film about someone who was a stutterer and didn't feel he could do it. It's an amazing movie. It's totally inspiring, I have to say. But I've also been really inspired by watching outstanding speakers who have been inspired and moved by the Spirit. Like I said, I always say when you see a medium who's demonstrating with the power being with them, it's almost like they're lit up like a Christmas tree because there's an external power that just adds to their light. And I find that to be very true of really, to me, developed, speakers who, really take what it is to be awakened in a spiritual address. I just feel there's a power that's there. So that aspect to me is really very important. It's like I said before, it's taken time to get to that place and to even recognize, am I speaking from intellect? Am I speaking from my soul? It can be a combination of both, as long as I've brought into that power of the Spirit, power of my soul, the presence of God. There's definitely a power when we're awakened that's very different than when we're just intellectual.
Yeah, so bringing that power is really key, what you're saying.
And I'd also encourage too, that if you have fear, you find a way to, ground it, harness it, shift it, and know that you can over time as well. I had a lot of fear about being in front of groups of people, petrified in the beginning, and that too will shift. So, I just really love to encourage everyone to believe in themselves, because speaking does become different. You evolve, you grow, and once you tap into and can harness that power of Spirit, in your speaking, it just shifts it to a different level. And everyone, I believe, has the potential to do that.
Right. Thanks. So you have the unique opportunity of being in the United States. So do you see any difference between British addresses and American? And do you modify yours at all depending on who you're speaking to?
I don't believe I modify. There's different platforms, I have to say. There's definitely platforms in the UK where, because of where you're speaking, you have to be much more, to me, there's probably some topics I wouldn't bring up. If I were here at home in my own church in America, we're probably a bit more broad-minded on, things that we would talk about from a platform. So, based on where I am, it might shift what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I found that as well. And something I'm really curious about is they do teach speaking students to tie in spiritualism to modern day society issues that are going on in today for people that they're dealing with. And are there any particular messages that you like to bring from Spirit for people who are maybe struggling now, or is there a theme you've noticed?
I'd say particularly today in these, 18 months of being in COVID, you know, a comforting, a stress level that is with society at the moment.
Mhm.
So, you know, particularly these days, you know, the sense of community as we come together in a different way. You know, we've been forced into a platform of Zoom, which we became very grateful for because it was a way to continue community. So, and I think society, as things go on, I have to say, you know, shifts us to, you know, different things that are happening in society, you know. Certainly to me, at the journey within social justice causes, things, if, you know, we look at the principles and our humanity, um, uh, spiritualists were very progressive about the betterhood of humanity. And I think we still have to be that. So it challenges us to live in today. And there's a lot of history of why it was, you know, monumental during their time to kind of shake the world a little bit with their beliefs, you know.
Yeah.
I think we're similarly should be doing that in different ways today, you know, and I think we have a great opportunity to do that as a lot of people are leaving traditional religion
Mhm.
and looking for a new home.
Okay, thank you. As you were speaking, I had this question come into my mind about God. And as far as spiritualists, we believe in God. And how do you see God interacting in people's lives? Do you see it as a being involved on a daily basis and how is God brought in through the spiritualist address? Because I know that we need to mention God. So do you have any perspective on that?
Sure. You know, there has been some movement, you know, for less prayer, for less involvement from a spiritualist perspective. That's certainly the furthest place I think we should be.
Yeah.
Because without addressing our spiritual lives, the spiritual aspect of self, which, whatever your concept of a higher power, is key to walking through this life. You know, we're walking through a material world, and without bringing the spiritual aspect, which should be done quite often, I have to say, you know, we won't awaken the spiritual tools that are within ourselves, or the capacity when we find life on, you know, life's terms here in the human world challenging and difficult, you know, to be able to shift to that perspective of God or a ministry of angels or loved ones on the other side or ancestors. There's just such a doorway there, you know, to me that is all inclusive of God as well. And, you know, whatever your concept of that great spirit, you know, for me, that's changed and evolved over the years. Certainly for spiritualists, I would find that to be a much more universal God than most traditional religions.
Yeah, that's excellent. Well, I am really profoundly appreciative of you. I know some of these are, my questions are a little complicated, but you know, I think a lot of people have these questions. And so this is why it's so helpful to be able to get some candid insight from people like yourself who are so well experienced. And I think my next question is about the principles, and we're taught to bring in maybe one or two principles. How do you like to talk about the principles? Do you name it specifically, or do you talk about it in general terms?
I'd say both, I have to say, and I will say in the United States we do use inclusive language, so it shifts it a bit more. It's important to me. So sometimes it's a reference point, sometimes it's a different quote or a different story, and I bring in the principle just to relate to it. So, you know, and I can't say it's part of every address. You know, I think it's important that it's significant. People should be aware of them. They certainly are, you know, a bedrock of what we, you know, use as a philosophy that we share from. But it's a combination of both. Sometimes it's the principle itself that it evolves into the address, and sometimes, you know, the address just brings in you know, as an aspect of one piece of it, the principle. So it's both ways it comes into it.
Mhm. Okay, excellent, excellent. So do you have a particular way that you like to end your address? I'm curious to know, do you just stop talking, or do you thank people, or do you have a particular phrase you say? Curious.
Here in the United States, it's a bit different, I have to say. A lot of times I use music. I
Oh,
won't say it's all the time, but maybe 20% I may end the address with a piece of music,
mm,
which I really find music moves people's hearts.
mm,
So I don't have a usual ending.
okay,
Sometimes I'll circle around back to the point of the whole address,
right.
which is just a speaking technique. You know, sometimes I end with a prayer, sometimes I end with a reading. So I can't say that there is one usual way I finish any address.
Mhm. And I would say for my final question, probably, I would say on the topic of prayer. Now, we do prayers and they aren't necessarily part of an address, but do you have any particular pointers or insight you'd like to give those students about prayer itself and what purposes it can serve as far as an address is concerned? Is there any way to tie a prayer in, or do you reference the prayer that maybe someone gave at the beginning in the address? That sort of is my general question.
Sure, a prayer could become, if let's say someone else opens with prayer, that could become the point of the address, I have to say. I think differently from other traditional religions where prayer is very rote, you know, the same prayer is repeated over and over. That may be comforting, but I think people lose the sense of it. They're just saying it by repetition. A prayer should come from the heart. It should be living and breathing, I have to say.
Mm.
It should take us all in, and I think it should be comforting to people, you know, on behalf of our society. I think it speaks to the community that we are if we use prayer in a way that, you know, addresses where we are currently, you know, and speaking on behalf of the community that we're on to that great spirit, I have to say.
Mhm.
So it just makes it a unique community to me, that feels us come together in community by the inclusion of prayers that are very alive and from the heart.
Mm. Well, that's beautiful. And again, I'd like to thank you for all the amazing work you do. You're just such a great role model for all spiritualists. You're really, an amazing person. And I appreciate all you do, as so many do, who benefit from your gifts and your dedication. So thank you for sharing yourself today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. So have a wonderful day.
You too. All right, friends, here we are again with the lovely Anne Marie Bond, who has so graciously agreed to contribute to our video. And I would like to welcome Anne Marie.
Thank you. Thank you, Gretchen, for inviting me. It's wonderful.
Yes, I know that you have so many talents, and I would like to ask if you could maybe share a little bit about your credentials and experiences in training.
Okay, my credentials, my training. Well, I'm a spiritualist medium, so let me start with that, loud and proud. And I'm a diploma holder of the Spiritualist National Union, and in demonstrating, and that basically means that I've gone through the SNU educational system in order to be able to understand the concept of what mediumship is and to learn how to demonstrate and to address an audience on spiritualist philosophy, and gone through all of the training. And also I was one of the winners for the Gordon Higginson Scholarship Memorial, and that was in 2014. And yes, it was the Gordon Higginson Memorial Scholarship. And I was very proud to be offered that scholarship, because at the moment it's not running, but at the time they only invited a few people, and I was lucky enough to win it. So there's that. And what else? Recently been appointed an Arthur Findlay College tutor, which I'm very proud about. And outside of that, I'm a design and delivery e-learning specialist. And I also, what do? I also teach mediumship. I'm a working medium. I hold speaking events. I teach speaking classes. Well, I don't teach speaking classes, but I teach students how to address an audience on our speakers course. And it's been a long journey, a very rewarding one at times. And at various times, it has been a roller coaster ride, you could say. But like everything in life, when you begin the journey of something new, you will find obstacles along the way, but it's how you handle those obstacles. Do you see an obstacle and you turn your back and walk the other way? Or do you stay, persevere and figure it out, go around it, go underneath it, go above it, or like me, go through it? So that's in a nutshell. One last thing, actually, it's just come to my mind. Everybody who probably watched this think, well, she hasn't said this special part. I'm a spirit artist as well. So that is my heart. And I do lots of varied artwork. So that's it.
Yes, and I'm so thrilled that you're participating in this video, Anne-Marie. You have been a great source of help for me in my own development. And I know we're curious how mediums who begin speaking in spiritualist churches, how they go from beginning to I don't want to say end, but how could you explain your process a little, how it's evolved from the time you first started speaking until now?
Yeah, sure. I started off, if you could find in your group of friends the most nervous person, or think of the most nervous student you've ever come across, times that by 100, that's where you would have found me at the very beginning. And I was very nervous. I was more nervous about speaking, the sheer thought of having to walk up on the platform, and not about the mediumship, but talking to an audience on philosophy. I didn't even understand what philosophy meant. And so in order to develop, I knew that going through the SNU education system would give me a structure, and it would give me a better understanding, but also if it was possible that I could possibly get to the part where I'm going to be assessed by people who don't know me, and they were to pass me, and people who are revered in the system as, you know, people of worth and character and mediums in their own right, and they would possibly pass me, then it would give me the idea maybe I have something to offer. So I remember the days before taking the PASS journey, and I remember being in open development circles, and I remember the tutor saying, go on, get up there, do what you want. Well, I wouldn't. I said, I'll just stay where I am, thanks. So it took a lot for me, feeling like a lone soldier. And after a period of time, what I started to realize, when I started to write down some talks that I would know that I'd have to give, because being on the PASS system for speaking and demonstrating, especially for speaking, you have to give spiritualist philosophy, whether you know what it is or not. You have to get up there and you have to talk for 10 minutes. And the mistake that I find that most people make, and myself included at the beginning, is not knowing a structure or not having a better understanding. It leads to students and myself talking about my personal life, why I came into spiritualism or how I came into spiritualism and what happened to me that week. And you find that 8 minutes have gone, I've spoken all about me, myself, and I, to hopefully share that story so it can resonate, I suppose, with the listeners. However, what happens is after a short period of time, the audience will start to disengage. They'll start to lose interest because most of the time we have a short attention span to listen. But the art of the speaker is to engage the audience. The art of the speaker is to inspire. And if you fail to do that and you lose the engagement of the audience, then really you're just speaking for self. And so what I would do is I would write down a full script, and I would spend weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks going over this, sweating, getting anxious. Oh my God, the day is coming closer and closer. And is this right? Are they going to receive what I'm saying? And how do I know if I'm making any sense? Because I didn't have anybody to actually direct me. I didn't have anyone to sort of guide me and say, actually, what you need to do is this. So it was almost like a work in progress getting up on the platform. Because when you go through the PASS system at that time, you're required to do 25 church events where you speak 25 times and get your logbook signed off. But after each speaking engagement, I would get the logbook signed off, but there would be no feedback. So you couldn't really tell if you were really making a difference, or you were doing it in the right way. So a lot of the time, and I know this happens with a lot of students as well, you end up feeling as if you are winging it.
Sure.
And what happened was, after weeks and weeks and weeks preparing, and I don't know how, I used to sit with Spirit a lot. Is this all right, Spirit? What do you think? And then I'd get guided by them. So much so, when I would get up on the platform and give my addresses, people would come up to me after and say, wow, I really felt like you were talking to me. Oh my God, that was really good. And I looked at people like, really? And it started giving me the question marks in my mind, like, do I really have a message? Can what people listen to, or what people listen to, is it making sense? Is it really touching their soul? And I started to find out that there was a lot of people that actually enjoyed it. And that started giving me a little bit of hope for the future. But then what I would do is I would go to a lot of spiritualist churches as well, because I find that that's the best training ground for a lot of developing mediums and speakers, to go and see the variety and the array of different wonderful speakers out there. And not to compare yourself, but just to learn from those that are more skilled, those who've been in the movement a long time. And how are you inspired by what they say? And so eventually I did my PASS, and I remember the gentleman, I won't call his name here, but I remember the gentleman, one of the board assessors, and he said to me, and I remember it well because I actually took the assessment in Croydon Spiritualist Church, and he said to me, you are the queen of pregnant pauses. And he said, that's where the power is. And I've always taken that, and it really did uplift me, and it inspired me to want to do better. And yeah, and then from then I decided that I'm going to pursue developing more. and to work through the rest of my education in that direction.
Brilliant, brilliant. So when you work now as a speaker, do you bring notes? Do you prepare notes in advance? Do you sit with spirit? How do you get ready before you?
Okay. Well, this is a very good question, because one of the things I teach, because I actually run a speakers course every Friday, and one of the things I teach the students is there's two things. Is it the destination or is it the journey for you? Because some people just want to get to the destination and they don't want to have the journey. But without the journey, how can you tell how far you've come? How can you tell how can you refine what you do? And I also say to them that the preparation is key to everything. Now, the stage I will give an address that is unrehearsed. So I will tend to listen to what, if there's a song that's going to be played first, I will probably feel inspired by something in that song. If someone's given a reading, I'd feel inspired by the words in the reading, and that will enable me to know what my first sentence is going to be, perhaps. And as I start speaking that sentence will flow on to another sentence, and it will flow on to another sentence. But one of the aspects I try and teach students is there's no need to rush. Too many of us feel that we've got to keep talking and fill every space and every gap and every moment with a word. Why? When you pause, there is the power in that silence, because you're allowing the audience to catch up to what you've said, but you're also allowing them to breathe. And in that breath, they are with you. Remember, as a speaker, you're taking your students or you're taking your listeners on a journey with you. And the only way they can follow you is by you learning and understanding how to speak to an audience, and knowing that as uncomfortable as silences are for those developing, actually your silences are your blessing. And so my preparation now, it depends. And I will say, if I'm in a doing a divine service, 99% of the time I will not prepare. However, the 1% is if I've been called up at the last minute, and yes, I could work still on the song, I could still work on the reading, but sometimes I will have, I may want to use a quote. I may want to use a phrase to start me off, and I may work with that and then carry on inspirationally, because that is the art of where most students should aim eventually, not at the beginning, eventually, when they feel stronger and when they are more confident and when they've refined their presentation to an audience, you will then be able to allow that inspiration to flow, understanding that in that inspiration, it's not a story of me, myself, and I. It's a journey of we, us, God. And so the idea of the preparation is help written preparation, the written script. I still teach students to do that. And whilst that may go against some other tutors' preference, because I understand there are people who would prefer students just to get up on platform and talk, just speak inspirationally. But the problem with that, if you're looking at where I was when I first started with no confidence at all, I would never have got up on platform unless I had something I could read from.
Mhm.
Students now, those, I call it the nervous inspirational speakers, I teach them how to develop a structured address on spiritualist philosophy, whether they're using a quote or starting with a rhetorical question, or perhaps creating an image or a vision for the audience, or telling a joke, an appropriate joke. There's so many different ways that you can start. But understanding in your address, there are some elements that you want to ensure that along the journey we touch upon.
Yeah.
And so learning how to write the address in a structure that's going to keep the audience engaged will help the student who's nervous to actually speak in front of an audience and be able to capture their attention. Because the idea of the written script is not to read it by route, not to read every single word, but to write your address, have a mindfulness exercise where you're brainstorming your ideas and your inspiration and you're putting it down. And then I teach them how to bite-size their entire script into a few bullet points. And from those bullet points allows them to stick to that structure, but it also allows them in the moment when they suddenly feel inspired to speak to the audience, that they can go and speak inspirationally. That's not already written. So my teaching caters more for those who are unconfident, those who are really nervous, those like myself needed a helping hand. And then my other more advanced group are for those who are learning to just speak inspirationally, because maybe their job, maybe their past experience, they've been able to have a position in life where they're comfortable at speaking to people. But maybe the language of speaking inspirationally on spiritualist matters may be something that they need to adopt and learn. So going back to your question, Gretchen, at the moment now, I will talk in inspiration, which is, for me to even have reached this stage, you would never have believed me. I would never have believed me when someone would say, oh, you would be talking to 50, 100 people. Because I run what's called an assembly, and in that assembly, it's the Spiritualist Speakers Service, and we run it on a Sunday and on a Monday. And in that, we invite seasoned guest speakers to address the audience for 20, 25 minutes, unrehearsed. And so those students on my speakers course, we are training them to get to that standard so that they can speak inspirationally for 20, 25 minutes. And we also have other things in that assembly. And so I did start off with a script, yes. I did learn how to reduce it and bite-size it, yes. And I would speak from that. Now I just carry my little quotes and phrases notebooks, and it's got all the little quotes and phrases that I hear along my path. Sorry for that little plug. I write down anything that I see, hear as a quote, as a phrase, and I think, oh, I could use that. It could be even in a song. We get inspired. You know, it's teaching students, Gretchen, where do you gain inspiration from? How do you gain inspiration? And so we look at that. We look at, you can gain inspiration in so many different ways. I gain inspiration from those who are nervous at speaking. How about that?
It's really brilliant. And I can see as you're speaking how you are definitely the queen of pausing. It's beautiful.
Oh.
It's beautiful. And I love the book idea. that you created, and I think you said that's available on Amazon?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon, and it's a blank, it is a blank, blank spaces,
Mhm.
allowing people to write down their quotes and their phrases. But what's special about it is I turn a quote or a phrase into a rhetorical question.
Oh.
So what we do is, and in that book, it allows that space. Okay, you've written down your quote now.
Mhm.
How would you turn this quote into a rhetorical question? So you would write your rhetorical question. So you've already got your start. So if you're ever caught off guard and someone says, oh, could you give us a talk? You grab your book, turn to any page, because you've got your quote, your rhetorical question. And from that, that will anchor you into your body part of your talk, remembering that, especially as a SNU spiritualist, that your talk, your address, should I say, would be on one of the principles.
Mhm.
And so we base it around that. So yeah, so that's what that's created for. And it's gone down a treat so far. So yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and I can't wait to get a copy, and I will put a link in the video comments so that if the viewers can order one for themselves or look
Sure.
into it further. Yeah. So we all are inspired by speakers, and I'm wondering, are there any particular speakers you've seen in the past in a church who really stood out for you?
Ooh, another good question.
Paul?
There are a number of speakers, of course there are. I would say that I couldn't list them all, but I would say a couple that stand out for me who have been in the movement nearly all my life, or half my life, should I say, would be Simon James. He's a great speaker. Brian Robinson, I think that's his surname.
Robertson.
And in the UK, I would say Minister Colin Bates.
Mm.
And actually, I have Colin's taken part in the assembly for the second time, as well as our guest speaker. He's in on Sunday, and he can just, you can just lose yourself in when he's speaking. You actually, he doesn't speak to your consciousness, your conscious self. He speaks to the soul self. So really it's on a soul to soul level. And I think any speaker that can capture the attention of both my consciousness and the soul self of me, and I can lose myself in that and just let my soul listen, then we're always on to a winner. So I would say at the moment, those are the gentlemen I could speak of. A lady that I would mention, because I realize that I've just mentioned all men there, I would mention Brenda Lawrence, Minister Brenda Lawrence. And again, she can really give a beautiful journey, inspired talk. I would say for a student that I've heard that can talk beautifully well would be Lorna Hines. I like the way that Lorna speaks. You know, again, you can lose yourself there. And, you know, even yourself, Gretchen, you've got a lovely way of addressing the audience, you know, very genuine, very honest in your approach. And I think that's wonderful. But again, there's lots of people that I could mention, you know, and, but yeah, I would say that, yeah, I would say those.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those. Those are really great examples of speakers who can inspire all of us from the platform during a service or in any other venue. Is there anything else you'd like to share or that's come up? I know you also have a workbook for speakers that is available on Amazon. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that. It's
Yeah, sure.
amazing.
Okay, let me just show you. I've got one of them here actually, if you can see it. Okay, it's called the Spiritualist Address Preparation Guide Workbook. And what this is, it's a workbook that shows people how to create an address. And what that does is it's got lots of pointers, lots of guided down the address. It doesn't teach you your content, because the content has to come from within, but where you're going to place that content and breaking down your entire script into bite-sized points. And so the first part of it teaches you how to use the book. So it gives you, a guided tour of the book, if you like. And then there are 4 blank templates, but those templates are probably about 10 pages per template.
Mm-hmm.
Break it down. How are you going to start? Are you going to use a quote or a phrase? So you might want to turn to this book. You put your quote and your phrase in your template to begin with. Now let's turn that into a rhetorical question. Now let's anchor that into the very start, the body of your content. How are you going to start? And what I found with this book was, even though we have a great educational system, I always, and most of my students know, most of my teaching is one for those less confident who basically have no confidence at all. But it's also for, I always teach people how they can develop at home alone on their own. Mm-hmm. Because my teaching has to come from my experience of being here on my own, of not having anyone above me to turn to and ask, how do I do this? So I spent a lot of time, a lot of years in agony, really, of, am I doing the right thing? Because one of the things that can instill fear as well, which is really odd, is when people say to you when you get off, oh, that was really good, well done, well done, well done. And that's what people say, and you think, oh. But then someone like myself would question that. Are they just saying well done? Mm-hmm. Or was it well done? But if someone says, oh, that was really good because it really felt like he was speaking to me, mm-hmm. or they break down that well done, it allowed me to have an understanding, okay, this is reaching people. And it's not necessarily that you need to thrive on the well done, or you need to thrive on someone giving you a compliment or giving you feedback, if that, because ultimately your job as a speaker is to come to deliver in gratitude, and that's it. But the idea is, as a developing speaker with no confidence, mm-hmm. sometimes some people work best on praise. And they work best on understanding why that praise has come forward. Mm. Similarly, as you get up and you do a talk and nobody says anything. Mm. If you have no confidence, you're going to go internally and think, everyone thinks I'm rubbish. Mm. So the idea of the book, the workbook, is to be able to help people at home on their own. They've got something to work with. But it does state, the disclaimer in the book does state that this isn't the only way to do it. Sure. It's also looking at, this is just one way that might work for you. But ultimately, your goal is to be able to stand in front of an audience and address your audience inspirationally. That in that inspiration, you lift those who are listening, that you give them hope, and that through the understanding of your delivery about God and your understanding of spiritualism life through one of the principles, that you give them food for thought to decide to make change through their own choices. And when we can do that, and we walk away knowing that we spoke from the heart to the God heart of those listening, then we don't need praise. We've done our job.
Outstanding. Outstanding. I love your voice. I'm
Thank
just
you.
mesmerized.
Oh,
And
bless you.
wow. So I think we're just about ready to bring it to a close, unless if there's anything else you'd like to add. But I've been asking all of the tutors, and the people who are contributing aren't necessarily in the SNU program. Many are. Others are kind of on their own, are already speaking at churches and maybe just looking for additional guidance and training. So I think this is wonderful. My question is, how do you know when you're finished? How do you kind of wrap it up and send, and finish your address?
Okay. Well, there's two ways. One, time, because if you've got a certain amount of time you're meant to speak for, time is going to stop you. But if that isn't the issue, then if you're speaking inspirationally, it's time. And what I would say to any of the listeners listening who are looking at their own development as a speaker is to understand that presentation is key as well. So it's not about standing and, oh yes, I talk to lots of people. It's about how you present the talk, the address. Because if you fail to self-assess yourself healthily, to not sabotage yourself, but healthily look at and review what you've said, how you've come across. And the best way to do that is to practice by recording yourself giving a talk. And it might be awkward at first to hear your own voice talking back to you if you're not prepared for that. But if you can listen to a talk that you might give in your own home, you sit there for maybe 10 minutes and you give an inspired talk, but you record it and you sit back and you listen to it. And if you can lose yourself in that and you don't actually hear you as the person speaking, but you are listening to the words, then there you go. There's your little guided understanding that you're touching souls. And so I would say never give up, because it's the easiest thing to do when it gets a little bit challenging, gets a little bit hard, or we go to places and we see someone who's been able to give a fantastic talk. Oh, I'll never be like that. It's not even worth me continuing. Don't you dare. Everybody listening has a voice and has a message. And if I can say to you from a little girl who way back when didn't have a voice, I will say to you, you have one, and give yourself the permission to be heard.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you again so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, wonderful. Hello, here I am again with Minister Jackie Wright. It is my honor to have her participate in this project that, due to her amazing ability, that I know she will probably humbly acknowledge, hopefully. But I saw her speak recently, and I just really was in awe. And so she has quite a bit of experience, and so I'd like to ask her to introduce. Hi, Jackie, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Gretchen. So, as you've already said, I'm a minister of the Spiritualist National Union. I hold diplomas in speaking, in demonstrating, in education. I'm also the chairman of the Arthur Findlay College, and I am a course organizer and tutor there as well. So I wear many different hats, as well as being the vice president of the Spiritualist National Union. So there's a lot of different hats I wear.
It's amazing, and it's gives me the chills just thinking about how dedicated you are. Thank you so much. So we're here today talking about spiritual addresses, and I'd like to ask first off if you could maybe describe a little bit about what a spiritualist address is, maybe from the point of an assessor or a speaker.
Yeah, so the spiritual address, or in other words known as the philosophy, is usually what gives people the biggest fear, especially students. It's like, oh no, I have to do this, and how am I going to do this? And I believe it's the word philosophy that frightens them, because in their minds they conjure up almost like a university degree or something like this. But with philosophy, what I believe we're looking for is an understanding of the teachings of spiritualism, and within Spiritualist National Union, that is based around our 7 principles. So we're looking for that understanding of them and how we can incorporate those principles into people's lives. So I always say to students, you've got to make your address or your philosophy fit your audience. So for example, if you're working in a church in a deprived area where the audience is worrying about basics like how they're going to pay their rent and things like that, your philosophy has to inspire them and give them hope.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going to do an address to maybe a university audience or professors, you've got to make it a little bit more highbrow or a little bit more intense. So it depends on the audience you're aiming at, but for a student, it should be inspiring, it should be relevant, and it should be based on one of the 7 principles of spiritualism.
Excellent, excellent. And how did you get started as far as speaking, and what was your process then, and how has that evolved and changed to now?
You see, it was a very difficult journey for me, mainly because, like I've just said, for a lot of students, I don't class myself as academic. So the thought of having to do a philosophy filled me with dread. I was very lucky. I had a wonderful minister called Minister Tony Penkett, who educated me. He's now retired, basically, but he educated me on what philosophy meant. And I did a lot of reading. I did a lot of research, because one of my passions is the pioneers of our religion, the people who literally put their livelihood, their freedom on the line, so I could stand on a church rostrum and do what I do. So I researched them, and another thing I'm very passionate about is the Spiritualist National Union's education scheme. So their courses that they run, that give you that insight. And I just think, you know, Gretchen, that if people really study the religion of spiritualism and not just the phenomena of spiritualism, they can't help but be inspired. They can't help but get passionate.
Yeah.
The problem we have is so many people only want to do the phenomena. Let me just give a message. Let me just do this. Let me just go into trance. And they miss the whole foundation of what spiritualism means. I was once told many, many, many moons ago that the illumination of spiritualism is contained within the philosophy. And I believe that's true. It's the philosophy that brings our religion to life. Mm. And if you study the religion, if you study spiritualism, then that passion should be there within you. Mm. And if you've got the passion, it's easier to do the talk.
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Are there any particular research materials or sources you would recommend?
Mm. Well, like I've just said, the SNU course notes, okay, they have a wealth of information. Books, I mean, if you're right at the start of your journey, the Silver Birch books are beautiful to read, and they give you a basic knowledge. But then if you want to go more into the religion, books like On the Side of Angels and the Gordon Higginson books, the Arthur Finlay books, they're a bit heavy, but nevertheless, they have a lot of information in. So the books that you're drawn to, a lot of our pioneering mediums, their books are wonderful to give you an insight, you know. So shop around is a good way to say it. And don't restrict yourself to just spiritualist books. Look at spiritual books, you know. So widen your scope. So you look at other religions, you look at other methods of philosophy, and keep your heart open to all of these kinds of disciplines.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Thank you. So when you are preparing for an address, say you know you're going to do it, do you have any process or anything you do in advance?
Mm. You know, when I was first starting off, I was just speaking about this the other day. When I first started off in the philosophy walkway, I would often be woken up about 2 a.m. with a subject in my mind. And I couldn't get rid of that. It would just stay with me. And then the next day I would work on it and build it into a philosophy. But now what I tend to do is when I'm sat preparing for my church service, then a thought will come to me. Mm-hmm. And I will then just build on that. Sometimes, like last night, I did a church service, and it was during the hymns being sung that I became inspired to speak about a subject. So now, because I'm a little bit further down the line, I don't always prepare in advance. I just let the spirit world move me. I don't think that's a good way for students to do it. I think for students, they should have a structure, because that will give them confidence. You know, if they don't have that structure in the beginning, then they could lose their way slightly.
Right. And do you bring any kind of a quote or a reading or anything with you, or have you memorized quotes? And I know that's something that assessors look for, so.
Yeah, and again, it depends. So if I'm working south of England, you need a poem, or you need a quote, or you need something. You know, there's a beautiful book, Echoes, by Deborah Skelton, a Canadian lady. And that's full of wonderful short addresses and quotes from our pioneers, like Emma Hardinge Britten, etc. And so that's become a little bit like a spiritual Bible for our speakers. So if I'm working south, I need something to lead me into the address, because they require it. But in the northeast, where I live, you don't. You just go straight into the address. So there's definitely a north-south divide.
Yeah.
But I do have quotes. There are quotes that I have that I use from Andrew Jackson Davies, from Emma Hardinge Britten, you know, from people like that. Robert Louis Stevenson, who said, it is one thing to believe in life after death, for it is first important to believe in life. You know? So there's quotes like that that can lead you in to an address.
That's amazing. So do you have any, these are all great pointers for speakers. Do you have any pitfalls? So any things to avoid? Have you seen any trends where big mistakes that people make that maybe they could avoid?
There's a couple. One is being too concerned with time. So I know that when you're training, you have to have 15 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes, depending on the discipline you're going for, pass, certificate, diploma. I'm not a big fan of that, because I would much rather hear 10 minutes philosophy that's inspired me than 20 minutes of just waffling to fill in time. So don't be too concerned with the clock. Make sure you are in your power and you are connected with that inspiration, not necessarily the spirit world, but your own inspiration. Talk on a subject you believe in. Okay, so for example, if you don't believe in a God, don't talk on the fatherhood of God, because you will not inspire the audience. So speak on a subject you believe in. Speak on a principle that inspires you. Because truthfully, Gretchen, if you are inspired, then you will inspire your audience. If you're bored with what you're saying, your audience is going to be bored.
Right. Yeah.
And I said this to a group I was teaching philosophy to. You could talk about Brexit. You could talk about politics, and as long as you're inspired, you'll inspire your audience. But if you're not inspired yourself and you're just going through the motions, your audience will know it.
I know it. Right.
And the other thing I would say, remember to smile.
Yeah.
If you smile, the audience will smile back, and you've got them in the palm of your hand then.
Excellent. So speaking about smiling, I know you are very good at bringing in humor into what you do, and it's beautiful. And do you have any pointers on humor? Is there ever a time when it's really doesn't work? Or
humor again has to be natural. It cannot be at the expense of somebody else. It cannot be detrimental to the spirit world or to the religion. I've heard people use humor inappropriately, and it's destroyed them, because people don't forget, you know, that you've done something wrong. So humor's good if you can, if it's naturally there. You know, I do find humor in a lot of things. So I'm somebody, when I'm observing life, I can find humor in it. But if it's not done respectfully, and if it's not done naturally, then it will destroy what you're trying to do. You'll just come across as arrogant and stupid, really.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Have you noticed a difference between giving an address online and in person?
Yeah, because, sorry, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, it's something I get so passionate about. Because when you're in a room with people, you can gauge how they are responding. You know if they're bored, you know if they're checking Facebook instead of listening. You can gauge their reactions. Online, you can't do that, because usually as the medium, I'm spotlighted, so I can't see the audience. So it feels like I'm talking to myself.
Right.
You know, I have no idea if the audience is engaging with me. Now, if I was in a room and the audience wasn't engaging, then I would change my style of speaking to get their attention. You know, maybe use a pause a bit more. But online, you can't do that.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a huge difference there. It's a lot colder.
Yeah, I found that myself, that humor doesn't seem to have the same impact. And so I am also curious to know about maybe speakers you saw in the beginning or in the past who left you with inspired, but also encouraged you to want to? I know you mentioned one of your tutors, but are there others that you would like to reflect on?
In honesty, I have never come across a speaker that has held me spellbound. I know we get told of them from the past, etc. I've never come across them in my pathway. And because I've seen a lot of speakers who would stand up, reluctantly speak for 5 or 10 minutes, and you knew they were reluctant to do it, it got me sad, because I was thinking, well, you know, this religion, there was let me backtrack slightly. There was a survey done by a university in England, and they asked people, why do you go to a spiritualist church? And people said, to get a message from my mum or my dad or my loved one. And they said, when you have got that message, why do you go back? They said, for the philosophy and the teachings. So that tells us the philosophy is needed. It's not just a filler for a service, it's needed. And I see so many speakers who want to do 10 minutes or 5 minutes and then get into the phenomena. So I saw very few that inspired me, very, very few. My mentor, if you will, Minister Tony Penketh, he was never a teacher of mine. He was just somebody who encouraged me. And he encouraged the philosophy more than the mediumship. So I was very fortunate in that way. But we have a whole, if we go back 100 years ago, our churches were filled with philosophers, not necessarily phenomena mediums, but philosophy. It's gone the other way now. People don't want the philosophy. You said it at the beginning. I put a course on at the Arthur Findlay College for philosophy. I'd be lucky if I got 6 students to it. Put a course on for mediumship and I'd have 76 students on it. So, you know, it's, and we have to take blame for that, or responsibility, because of the way we have, in a way, marketed it, that we have pushed its importance enough. So, yeah, so I'm afraid I can't answer that one.
That's okay. Is there a particular attitude or a way that you could tie mediumship more with speaking? So how is mediumship incorporated into speaking? Or is it maybe ahead of time, during the speaking? And do people refer to spirit while speaking?
I don't know if they refer to spirit while speaking. I do, but I don't know if others do. There is a set program, if you will, for how our churches do their services, with prayer, philosophy, mediumship. Should there be a change in that? Maybe, I don't know. But what I do know is, unless we have speakers who can hold an audience's attention, it doesn't matter where we change it or what we do. It's the quality of speaking I think we need. And that quality is missing. And it's missing because the phenomena is more exciting to people. And that's a shame, you know. When my life is being crashed against the rocks and I don't know what I'm going to do or how I can find a safe haven, it's the philosophy and the teachings that give me structure and how to move my life forward. Not listening to my mum and dad in the spirit world. That's what I call a quick hit or a quick fix. The philosophy gives me a depth. It gives me a reason for my life. And it gives me hope in death, you see. But the phenomena, I think what happens, you see, I think what happens is, as we understand spiritualism more, we outgrow the mediumship a little bit. It's like, yeah, I've had a message from my loved one. Yeah, no, they're okay, but there's got to be more. And it's a philosophy that gives us that more.
Yes. And I know that students need to bring God into their address. That's part of the assessment process. And is there a particular, do you have any pointers about that as far as how to bring God into an address and make it not really noticeable, but relevant to today's society?
Before they do that, Gretchen, they have to understand what God means to them. What is your understanding of that word God? Are you, not you, but the student, still looking at God as this all-empowering man in the sky who's pointing a finger? Are we still looking at God as the way Orthodox religion teaches us? Or have we studied God, that word, and come to our own understanding and belief? Because unless we understand God, we can't talk about it, that power.
Sure.
So before you can bring him into an address or bring the power into the address, you've got to know what you're meaning. You know, we've got people who say, don't talk about God, it'll turn the people away. Well, it will if you talk about him like you're doing a sermon in an Orthodox church. But if you know that God really is not just a power, but a power that is relevant within us as well as around us, that you're a part of God as well as I'm a part of God, makes it much easier to talk about God in an address, you know?
Yeah.
But first you've got to know your subject material.
Sure.
You have to believe in God before you can ask others to. Yeah. It's no good just saying, well, it's part of the assessment, I have to do it. You've got to believe it.
Excellent. So, well, thank you so much. I do intend to have your contact information in the notes so people can check out, you know, how to get in touch with you and discover further training, because you're so knowledgeable and you really have your finger on the pulse of spiritualism. So it's really brilliant. I think my last and final question probably is, how do you close an address? Do you have a particular saying, or do you kind of pause? Do you thank the audience? How do you like to close?
I never thank the audience, never. But I try to leave the audience with what I call food for thought. So I will usually leave my address with an open question.
Okay.
Or an open statement, sorry. That, you know, so what do you think, ladies and gentlemen? Or is this your understanding? And I'll leave them with something, turn away and sit down, because I'm hoping to leave them wanting more. And so I don't thank them because they've only sat and listened. So,
sure, yeah.
You know, but I will leave them with something, I call it food for thought, you know. The address has to have an opening that catches their attention. Then needs the middle part that gives it substance, and then we leave them with something to think about, so they go, oh, going back next week because I want to know more about that.
Yeah.
But we have to do that in an inspiring way. And if we don't use the intonation of our voice, if we don't understand what we're talking about, we'll never get that structure together.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. That's just brilliant. And thank you again to Minister Jackie Wright for your beautiful presence and sharing your wisdom and experience.
Thank you.